Hello, I'm Dave Hiskey and you're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel. In the video today, we're looking at why the cheddar cheese you find on shelves at supermarkets is often some shade of orange when milk is white. Milk is made up of about 87% water and 13% solids, such as fat and various proteins. Chief among these proteins is something called casein, 4 types of which make up about 80% of the protein in milk. The casein protein molecules are typically suspended somewhat uniformly throughout the milk and are spherical, about a micrometer across. The reason they're somewhat uniformly suspended in the liquid is because kappa casein molecules have a negative electrical charge, so they repel each other. White objects in nature appear such when there is some level of light diffusion going on and no part of the visible spectrum gets reflected off the object any more than any other part of that area of the light spectrum. As you might guess from that, these casein proteins and some of the fats in the milk scatter and deflect light somewhat uniformly throughout the visual spectrum. This results in milk being fairly opaque and appearing white to our eyes. This all brings us back to the question at hand. If milk is white, why is cheddar cheese such a striking orangish yellow color? Before more modern industrialized milk farming, cows grazed in pastures abundant with beta-carotene-rich grasses. As they digest the naturally orangish pigment in the grass, it's stored in their fat cells. When a cow gives milk, the beta-carotene-colored milk fat is secreted in globules, primarily made of triglycerides surrounded by a lipid membrane, which itself is surrounded by protein clusters. While the cow's milk will usually still appear mostly white in the human visual spectrum, depending on the type of cow, the time of year, and the fields it's grazing in, this beta-carotene-laden fat can turn the milk an off-white, or in the extreme, a slightly golden color. With traditional cheddar cheese making, the beta-carotene-infused fat is left in the milk, and after the rennet, bacteria, and heat work their magic on the liquid, the protein clusters release their grip on the globules and their membranes dissolve, such that they are no longer opaque, making the beta-carotene a little more visible. Once the whey is drained and pressed out, the fat is also more concentrated in the final product than it was in the original milk. Thus, since the color comes from the beta-carotene in the fat, for those cheeses made this way, as opposed to things like higher acid cheeses or those made with goat or buffalo milk, those with the higher fat content will tend to take on a yellowish hue. Accordingly, cheddar, with approximately 32% fat content, compared to say whole milk mozzarella at about 17%, classically was a slightly golden color, akin to butter that hasn't been dyed, rather than the distinct orange-yellow color we typically associate with cheddar today. So why the change to deeper colors? According to Professor Paul Kienstedt of the University of Vermont, this started around the 16th and 17th century in England. At this time, certain cheesemakers began skimming some of the cream off the milk to sell separately before making the cheddar, lowering the fat content but still producing relatively tasty cheese. This practice resulted in much paler, even white cheddars, which consumers found and still find less desirable. To mask the true fat content, the farmers began to adding color back in. Common colorants included marigold petals, carrot juice, and even saffron, but most cheesemakers ultimately settled on annetto, a relatively cheap and available seed containing pigments that will turn things a lovely yellow-orange depending on concentration. When cheesemaking became industrialized in the 19th century, many companies chose to continue the practice of dyeing certain cheeses like cheddar, and for marketing reasons, the exact hue of the cheese continued to move away from the classic light gold to more of the orangish yellow we have today. Beyond any form of agrifraud certain 16th and 17th century cheesemakers sometimes employed, this was something of a necessity on an industrial scale, given that the manufacturers used milk from numerous different farms to make their products. Given the end color of the cheese could vary greatly based on things like the time of year, exact diet of the cows and cattle used, Guernsey and Jersey cattle, for instance, tend to produce a richer colored milk, it was very difficult to get a consistent color in a given brand's product without dyeing the cheddar. And as consumers, much like today, strongly preferred near pumpkin-colored cheddars, the practice of dyeing the cheddar was a handy and cheap marketing trick. Speaking of diet, over the last couple centuries, many milk farmers have shifted away from primarily pasture feeding their cattle to providing a dry feed diet. One of the key benefits to this is that the farmer can ensure a much more consistent tasting end product, though there does appear to be some sacrifice in nutritional value in doing this. Most pertinent to this video, another negative side effect, at least as far as many consumers are concerned, is that dry feed diet lacks the beta-carotene of the pasture grasses, making the cheddar white regardless of fat content, again requiring the annatto seeds to get the color consumers want. Many butter manufacturers dye their butters yellow for similar reasons, regardless of the quality of the butter itself or the diets of the cattle producing the milk. A noticeable golden color is simply what people expect the color of butter to be, and if it's not, they usually buy the brand that offers that color. So thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please click that like button below, and also consider subscribing if you're not already. And do check out our archives. We've got over 600 videos now, so you're sure to find something you find interesting.